Hello, and welcome to New Voices in AI, the series from AIhub, where we celebrate the voices of Masters and PhD students, early career researchers, and those with a new perspective on AI. I am Joe Daly, Engagement Manager for AIhub, and this week I'm talking to Chris Emezue about some of his work. And without any further ado, let's begin. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you could just
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
If you could just tell us who you are, where you are, what you're kind of working on, very briefly.
Awesome. I am Chris Emezue. I'm currently based in the Technical University of Munich, Germany. I'm doing my master's there. I'm working on machine learning, natural language processing, causality around that areas of interest.
Nice. And I mean, we'll get back into that a little bit more, but do you have any like fun facts about yourself that aren't directly AI related?
Well, a non-AI thing I do is to play badminton. I love playing badminton a lot. So it's not football as many people would often go for, but it's badminton. I love that game so much.
It's a great sport. It's good. I imagine quite, I don't know, tactical in some ways. Uh, And so yeah, how did you kind of get into AI?
That's very interesting. So I didn't originally, from a young age set foot on AI. I started with trying to find myself. So I remember in high school, during the final years of high school, I was trying to know where I fit, where to go, what to study for my bachelor's. And it was quite hard because I had so many interests and talents, and it was hard to choose one. But I did love two things. I loved the idea of solving problems and thinking about them abstractly. That's mathematics. And I also loved computer and working with computer. So I got a wonderful advice from my mom to study mathematics because from there it will be easy for me to go into any field, any scientific field that I want in the future. So I did that. I got a scholarship doing to do my undergraduate mathematics at Russia. So I'm studying in Russia mathematics. I realized that I don't just want to do a theory and just study the theoretical things of proving laws. I want to apply them to real life and see practical implementations of products being developed from this. And so I got into AI reading Francois Chollet's Deep Learning with Python. That was the first time I started, oh, there's a thing called deep learning, and you can write a bunch of programs, and voila, your model is training, it's doing something called learning, there's learning rate going down, and it can recognize images. And it was so fascinating. And finally, I saw like this mathematics that I'm studying is actually being used for something, very powerful. It's not just teaching mathematics at secondary
Mm.
schools or universities. And that's how my interest started.
Oh, that's really cool. It's kind of amazing how it goes from just like one thing and kind of spirals out from just math.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, true.
and you kind of said a little bit there about kind of discovering deep learning and like how you kind of apply this maths and it can do things. What's, I guess, is that
Yeah.
part of what kind of excites you about AI, or is there something in particular that you find exciting?
The major thing that excites me about AI is simply you have a bunch of functions and equations. And back then in secondary school and in university, you're like writing and proving theorems, and you don't understand why you're proving this guy's theorem. But in AI, you can really see how these numbers and functions like play in the real
Mm.
world. You have a function approximation, and suddenly you have a model that can predict handwritten digits. It's just so amazing. Another thing that excites me about AI is you don't have to program like write the code explicitly for what you want, right? You just give it a bunch of data, and the model can kind of sort of like write its own functions to get the output that you desire. So those are the two things that really excite me about
Yeah.
AI. It's quite
Mm.
fascinating.
Saying about being at school, like I think we've all heard that thing of like, why am I bothering learning this maths? What is it ever going to be used for? And turns out it leads to this.
Yes. Yes, true.
um, what do you think?
In fun fact, in during my undergraduate, I wasn't quite serious with
Mm,
probability, but now I cherish the my probability lecturer that took time to really explain the details, and I really I wish that I really took probability very seriously, because that's like
mm,
kind of the whole basis of most of the things in artificial learning, intelligence and
yeah.
machine learning. So yeah, math is very, very important.
Yeah, don't underestimate the importance of maths.
Exactly.
And what do you think might be some of the biggest challenges in AI in the next 5 to 10 years?
Um, so right now we're at a world where machine and deep learning, our models keep getting deeper and deeper. We have so much compute power, so much data, although we really don't have enough data. But right now there's this idea that if you just get more and more compute power, and then your models get bigger and bigger, then you can solve most of the problems. But there have been a lot of awareness, research, and efforts that show that that's not the future of, that may not be the only future of AI. So one thing that very, very interests me is a thing called out of distribution generalization. In natural language processing, I think it's called something like few shot learning, zero shot learning. Basically, the idea is a model being able to generalize to data or a scenario that it has not seen before. So this is something that, unfortunately, it's not solved in AI right now. And I feel that this is the main, if not one of the major challenges in the next 5, 10 years of AI.
It's kind of that generalizability without it getting so out of
Yeah,
hand with the
exactly.
giant models. Um,
Yeah, true.
and kind of this touches very much on kind of it's like this big challenge. Do you think that's one of the biggest challenge, or do you think there's any other big challenges and or I guess opportunities in AI?
So there is a
Mm,
generalization. I would see it as a subset of generalization is um, training a model or building a model with little to no data. So there are some scenarios or some places where you cannot get enough data for something. So for example, the work I'm doing with African languages, you have 2,000 African languages, but many of them don't have up to, I would say 5,000 sentences. Some don't even, are not even, they're oral based. So you don't have enough data for these languages. And you cannot just use large pre-trained models because these models require huge, enormous amount of data. So working with low data, like we call it low resource
mm,
languages, it's a very huge opportunity I see. There's also the part of like deployment of these models to the real world, because in research you can make a lot of assumptions on compute power, on a lot of things. But when you come to the real world, then this stuff gets really tricky because there's things to contend with. So that's another very interesting area for me.
yeah, the real world is kind of we have these lovely idealized models, and then as soon as it hits the real world, it's all kinds of messy.
It's a different
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
So we kind of touched a bit on your research there. Could you tell us a bit more about kind of what you're working on at the moment and kind of some of the implications for it?
Cool. Um, I am working on a number of
Mm,
things. First on my list is what we call Africa NLP. So that's natural language processing with a focus on African languages, because like I mentioned, they are low resource. They also have morphological and very interesting linguistic properties that English
mm,
doesn't have, or high resource languages don't have. So I work with amazing researchers at Masakane and around the world on research that's connected with African
mm,
languages. Um, Still on that with African languages, I am founder of an effort called Lanfrica, which is basically showcasing and making these African language resources discoverable. So the papers, the data set, and projects on African language resources, making them, creating a central hub so that anyone looking for any resource for any African language can easily find it. So that's the NLP word. Now, not recently, about a year ago, I got very interested in a thing called causality and structural learning. So that was during my internship at Miller, which I'm doing right now as a visiting research student. So I am very passionate about causality, structural learning, which is basically a way to solve the problem of the out of distribution generalization by training these models to do more than just learn the correlation between data. That's how I'll
Yeah,
put it.
there's like, I mean, there's a lot to kind of cover in there, but yeah, the discoverability of the like low resource language stuff is so important to kind of make sure that kind of everyone can kind of
Yeah.
benefit from all these advances in AI. Um, and
True.
I'm sure that's very exciting, but is there anything particularly that kind of excites you about these kind of areas of work?
Um, So in the area of Africa NLP, I'm very excited about the work I'm doing at Lanfrica because it has proven to be very, very useful. So we've had a lot of very positive feedback on how it's easy now to find resources. It also opened some other things, areas to work on. It's about the idea of finding information in African languages, like relating to African languages and just making this way of finding information very easy. So I'm very passionate about the work I'm doing at Lanfrica. And the area of causality, I'm very passionate about that work. So a structural learning, it's a pretty new field for me because I just got into it, but I'm very excited about the areas it opens up because causality or structural learning, it cuts across different fields. It's used a lot in drug discovery. It's used a lot you can also find it in natural language processing, representation learning. So it really cuts across different fields, and I'm quite fascinated about that.
Yeah, that's yeah, figuring out exactly what's kind of going on. Like it's quite cool to kind of dig down into that. What do you think will be some of the biggest kind of impacts of your work for kind of people in kind of the everyday?
Yeah. So for African languages, I imagine a world where when you call an African language, like you say Igbo or you say fun, people are not going to look at you like, what's that? So I imagine a world where African languages get the same level of the discoverability of attention as high resource languages. Think of English, French, German, and discoverability and attention in terms of the research. So one thing I say a lot is I really want a world where I can talk to Google or Siri in my native language, native African language, and she or he can reply to me and get things done. So that's the world I imagine. And I feel the work we're doing at Masakane, the work that all researchers are doing to relating to an African language, which is from works on data sets creation to research and model implementations, and then to Lanfrica, all these works, and then to other
Mm,
organizations that I don't know of, all these works, help push this dream of representing African
mm,
languages. And then to complement it, the work I'm doing on structural learning, which has to do with out of distribution modeling, would really help take AI and machine learning to the next stage, which is machine learning when there is very little data available. So you don't have to rely on so much
mm.
data.
Kind of
So they kind of complement
yeah,
each other.
it is that kind of lovely kind of synergy of kind of one really does kind of help the other, and it's such important work to kind of make sure. I mean, I've kind of said this already, but like yeah, making sure that everyone can kind of benefit from AI and kind of it's not just localized to like the high resource languages. Like it's yeah, it's so important that
True.
everyone can benefit um, and make the most of AI. And I guess this kind of almost links a little bit. So with our question from the previous new voice in AI, Umaima Hadri, whose kind of work is a lot about kind of ethical AI and responsible AI. So I have a feeling that actually kind of almost links a little bit, but So her question was about how do you kind of engage with responsible and ethical AI in research, and kind of why do you think that could be important?
That's a very good question. I like this particular question at the field of ethical AI, because with the current trend of AI, which is just huge models, deep models, and there's the hype on the performance, very few people ask questions like, what data did they use? The data owners, do they have the right, so these, especially when big tech comes in and shows all these amazing things, and people are asking these questions. So for example, the work I'm doing with African languages and at Masakani, a very important topic we always touch on is data governance. And the idea is giving the data owners, or the people who contributed to this data, giving them the ownership or governance of how their data is used, so that they don't make this data and dump it somewhere in the name of public domain, and then one big tech swoops in, takes data, trains a model, releases a product based on the model, and they have to pay for it. So this is a trend that's happening. This is the trend that will keep happening. And I think things like ethical AI, and for me, what I think there's a subset of ethical AI, which is data governance. That's something I'm very passionate about. It's about giving the community of the community, the language community, giving them governance of their data. So we've had a lot of discussions on this at Masakane. There's actually Kate Stevens from Surface Data Collective who is working on that. So trying to build platforms that are more pro data governance. The work at Lanfrica, which is trying to make these African language resources visible, is also pushing in that area, because when when these resources get attention, then because the resources get attention, but they are governed by the license of the dataset owners, and so they get attention so that people can know about them and get to use them. So in summary, I am really passionate about ethical AI, especially data governance, and this is what I have been focused on quite a lot at Masakane with African
Yeah,
languages.
the point about sort of creating these data sets and not like having to then pay
Yeah,
back like the thing that you kind of made. I imagine that's quite a big,
yeah.
potentially quite a big challenge.
Unfortunately, it's not something that can be done immediately. I think it takes planning, which is one thing. I think Masakane and a group of other people, I think the African Union is also in on it. It takes planning, it takes pushing, it takes showing the importance of this. But I also like that some small communities are also taking decisive action. So there has been talks about the Maori language community who refused to put their works open source just because of this. And so there have been a few communities here and there taking some few actions, and Masakani too with the African NLP workshop, and also some workshops trying to promote data governance. They're really good
Yeah,
efforts, in my opinion.
and so it definitely sounds like you're saying about communities. It really is kind of a community effort, sort of all these people kind of
Yes.
working together
Yes.
to achieve the best possible kind of
Yes.
outcomes for everything. Um,
True.
and penultimate question: what is your question for the next new voice in AI?
Okay. Um, So with the current trend of AI, so it's like every month you have one amazing update, maybe either a very big model with some really amazing results. For example, DAL E2 came out recently. You have Palm, very huge language models coming out with amazing results. One might think that we're really getting close to this artificial general intelligence where you have super smart machines doing really amazing things. Sometimes that notion is met with worry and fear, because when you think of Terminator, sometimes it's met with excitement. So there are cool things like Jarvis and Iron Man. And one particular thing is there's a Netflix movie about people speaking in their original native language, and you can understand them. So you have like a device or something, and you can speak fluently in your own language. So these are cool things in the future with artificial intelligence. And my question is, do you believe in the future? So I'm looking at let's say 20 years time in the future. Do you think we, at the current pace we're going, we can get to artificial general intelligence? I'm not talking of Terminator, okay? So don't go there. Do you think we can get there? And what's your take on that? So what do you think about that? That's my
Ooh.
question.
Everyone has such like excellent questions, and this I'm gonna, as always, be very intrigued to kind of see what people think on that. And
Okay, I would also like to see the next person, hear the next person's reply from there.
yeah, I think it can be like general artificial intelligence can sometimes be, I wouldn't say controversial, but
It
it's kind
is very, very controversial. Yeah.
of so yeah,
Because yeah, some think we're not even near there. Some think, oh wow, we're really making great progress. So
yeah,
yes.
be intriguing to see what they say. Um, Brilliant. And very finally, where can we find out more about some of your work? Where can we follow it online?
Okay. Um, I am I'm not really a fan of social media, but I'm on Twitter. So I do post a lot about my work on Twitter. So there's a Twitter for me, there's a Twitter for Lanfrica. I also use LinkedIn. So these are places that one can find out about my work.
Brilliant. And as always, we will have the links to that on AIhub. Um, brilliant answers as always. It's been really lovely to chat. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very grateful.
And finally, I would like to thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to know anything else about the series or catch up on previous episodes, do join us on aihub.org. And until next time, goodbye for now.